Hello. I am trying to whittle down a presentation of Adventist correct interpretation of Daniel 8 and 9 and why they believe what they do in a way that is as quick or brief as possible, kind of laying out some of the main reasons why it is right. But in order to do that, if you're not familiar with the text at all, it probably won't be very good to you, but you could still use it to kind of understand the Adventist view if you're willing to put some time into what, understanding the text, how the text flows. But it's particularly helpful if you're at least some fairly familiar with the contents of the layout of the entire structure of Daniel and the way the prophecies come out from the beginning till up into chapter 8 and 9 and beyond. And also how 8 and 9 interact with each other is very important. That's what I'm going to focus in on. And kind of, it'll seem quick, but it will be, I want to make this as a reference point. And towards the end, I'll actually kind of lay out briefly the arguments in a quick fashion so that you can go back and in your own study, see if these things make sense. But it actually takes effort. So I find that most people that even briefly speak of Adventist theology, they can't even get the basics right in their statements to the public. And they're saying things like they're a cult. They're definitely wrong because Ellen White predicted. It's like, oh, whoa. Ellen White didn't predict that. It was a Millwright. So if you're going to condemn Adventists outright because you think Ellen White predicted the end of the world because you don't understand the history, then if that's a proper way of speaking of a group that you don't know what you're talking about, but you're talking about them anyway, then by your own, that standard that you've falsely used, I guess if I follow your example, I would have to say, actually, no. The reality is Miller made the prediction, an impressionable Ellen White became part of that movement with her family from a Wesleyan background. And guess who invented that? A Baptist. So I guess I have to dismiss all Baptists, which I don't, because that's a bad way of operating, because it's more complicated than that. But so the constant things I see from people saying incorrect statements and then dismissing and then spreading that, if I follow that example, the reality is I'd have to dismiss all Baptists, which I don't, because that is a bad way of operating. So maybe don't talk about stuff you don't know what you're talking about, or at least give the caveat that you don't know about it well. That's forgivable. Anything's forgivable. Okay, let's get started. As I said, it'll be quick and brief, but it'll be a reference because I have slides. I'll try not to give too much commentary in between the slides, but it'll be a point of reference. So that when you are ready to put the time in, this would be a point of reference. Okay. Oh, wrong slide. Go to the beginning. This is going to be hard for me because I'm not good at being brief, staying on track. Okay. Daniel 8. Daniel 8 is after Daniel 7, and Daniel 7 is a recapitulation of Daniel 2, which is Daniel 2 is Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue, which Daniel gets into his court while they're in captivity in Babylon, because he is able to interpret the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. And this lays out from the Babylonian period, which they're in, around 600 BC, and the successive world empires that take over up until at least Jesus' time, that fourth empire being Rome. Babylon, which is current, Persia, Greece, Rome. And that is the history of civilization, which is documented. Okay, Daniel 7 recapitulates that, giving it different details, different symbolism, but same succession of empires. Then we get into Daniel 8, and there's all kinds of controversy within the greater Christian community, but here's where we are. Daniel 8 is the first chapter that reverts back to Hebrew. Daniel, somewhere at the beginning of what's chapter 2 in the English Bible, it goes from Hebrew to, I believe that's correct, something like that. From the first chapter just into chapter 2 is Hebrew, written in Hebrew, at least as we understand. Then from there on, it's Aramaic. And now chapter 8, or somewhere right by chapter 8, it goes from the Aramaic back to Hebrew until the book is finished, I do believe. Most conservative Christians of all stripes, but not all, but most, and historically this is the case, have argued that even though that's the case, it is a single author, and it truly is Daniel who is living in the period the book claims he is. That is, when they're in captivity in Babylon. This is historical. And the entire book of Daniel was at least put together by Daniel, despite the, Nebuchadnezzar probably wrote a portion of it, whatever. So chapter 8 reverts back to Hebrew, or somewhere right near here. Here we are. So we have the layout of history already from 2 and 7. Chapter 8 is disputed, but here we go, regarding what the proper interpretation is. In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, that which appeared unto me at the first, which would be referencing chapter 7 at least. Okay, probably, because he lays out these kingdoms. And I saw in a vision, okay, so he's describing the vision. It's a new vision. And I'm just going to point out where this term vision in English is in the text of Daniel, starting in Daniel 8. I saw in a vision, and I saw in a vision. Okay, very crucial thing that people often don't even know this. The word vision in English is 2 words in the actual original language. There's 2 words that are translated vision. Particularly, we're going to focus on this chapter. In Hebrew, there's mare. And you can watch my other videos on Daniel talking about the proper definition of these terms. But I'm just trying to be very factual. Words can both mean the same sort of thing and can have much overlap. I'm not denying that. Okay, that's the case. Okay, see other videos too for that explanation. But it's true that there are 2 different words that are both translated vision in the chapter and the book of Daniel. And there's associations you can make if you study it out carefully. In this chapter, vision is mare in the Hebrew and hazon. Okay. This first mention in this chapter, of course, which wasn't in the original writings, obviously the chapter breaks, but there is a kind of a natural break here. The first 3 occurrences are in the first 2 verses, and they all are hazon, which I've highlighted as red just so it stands out so you can see it visually. Okay. Then he goes on to start describing the vision. As I said, I'm going to go kind of quickly. He's describing using the ram. And by the way, this vision seems to start in the after Babylon now. In chapter 7, chapter 2, Babylon is mentioned. This vision, which is following the same structure, starts with the Persian period, which is the one after Babylon, the 2nd kingdom, okay? And this is describing Medo-Persia, because it was 2 kingdoms, one larger than the other, Persia being the main body, but next to each other in the region, east of Jerusalem. And it's being described how these kingdoms would go one after the other, okay? And it's certainly, everybody agrees it's Medo-Persia, and then Alexander the Great and the Greece Empire takes over. So the next time we see the term vision in the chapter is after he's described some of the vision. Then I heard, okay, so now he's having kind of another vision regarding this. How long shall I heard one saint speaking to the other. Another said to the certain saint, which said, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily? The word sacrifice isn't in the original text. It's added by interpretation. Doesn't really matter. But it's just an interesting point. And the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. And he said unto me, to 2,300 days in the King James, but it's really Arab Boker in plural, I think. So it's evening mornings. Okay, they translated days because set out in Genesis, an evening and a morning, the first day, the evening, the morning, second day. We have symbolic imagery going on, which means they really shouldn't have put days, because it should be rendered in the weird form so you recognize where it's where it could potentially at least be symbolic. Days actually suggests it may not be symbolic when you in the translation there. And it came to pass when even I, Daniel, seen the vision and sought for the meeting, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. Now, the reason I highlight this blue, it's going to be this other term that's translated vision in English, but the first time the word appears in this chapter, it is actually the term appearance, which is similar to the sort of idea of how these two terms are used, like a vision and appearance, something you see, and the hazon is often a more illusory sort of vision that you don't actually maybe see with your eyes, okay? So, but this is the first appearance of this word that will now be translated as also vision in English, which is the term mare, hazon mare. So up until chapter 15, this other term hasn't been used in this vision, in these visions in this chapter. Okay, moving on. Now, we have the first occurrence of this new word, mare. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand not the hazon, the one he's been using for all of his visions up to this point. A guy appears, vision, it's mare, the appearance of a man. And now this term is applied to understand a vision. But if you didn't know the different words being employed, you would assume or presume that it's the same vision from the previous verse. That is, the only word that's translated vision in English so far is hazon. We have mare appear, but it's not even translated vision in the English. So you wouldn't even recognize that this new word, which is now going to be said to be a vision, exists in the original manuscript. So you would obviously think that vision he's about to be described would be referring to the same visions as the term hazon, but it's not. And that's important because you wouldn't even see this in the English. That's the problem with not showing the distinction. Why would you think it's any other vision than the one he's been talking about? But as you can see, this first time this vision here comes from that term mare. And so it's not necessarily talking about the same thing up to this point in the chapter, right? Why do I say that? So he came near and it stood. He said, I was afraid and fell on my face. And he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. He was asking how he wanted to understand the hazon. Now this guy appears regarding the mare, and he tells Gabriel to make Daniel understand the mare, not the hazon. Okay, new word. Think about that. In English, you wouldn't know this. You would think of course, it's the vision he's been talking about. No, it's the mare vision. Now, and why do I say that that's, even though the words can have overlap, well, why would he use a different word if he didn't mean something other than what he's been talking about when he's writing the book? Here's confirmation of that. So he came near to me where I stood. When he came, I was afraid, because remember, Daniel asked, he sought to understand the hazon. This guy says, make him understand the mare. And in case you don't believe me, the guy comes up and he says, look, he said unto me, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the thing you were asking about. That's for the time of the end, the hazon. That's what he was seeking to understand. This guy says, no, make him understand the mare. Then the guy's like, yo, the thing you were asking about, that's for at the time of the end. It's almost like an answer to his request. Don't worry about that right now, basically. I want you to understand the mare. And about that hazon, don't worry, it's for the time of the end. But in English, you would have no way to see this, because they both would he'd be asking about the vision, he'd be making him understand the vision, and then he'd be saying that vision is for the time of the end. But no, they've made a separation by the different word usage. That seems to be clear. Here's another reason to think that. Let's see. Here's the next time these words come up again in this chapter. And the vision of the evening and mornings, which was told is true, wherefore shut up the hazon, again, for many days in the future. Or for it shall be for many days, like we just saw. That's for the time of the end. It'll be for many days in the future. But the mare of the evenings and mornings was told is true. The angel came to make him understand, but not the other. The only thing they've said about the other is for that part is for the time of the end. Now, this chapter ends with saying, and I, Daniel, fainted and was sick in certain days. Afterwards, I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the mare, but none understood it. None understood it. So basically, he wants to understand the hazon. The guy's like, no, I'm going to teach you about the mare. And at the end, when it's all said and done in this chapter, the thing he just said is for the end and is associated with the 2300 in the time of the end for many days in the future. He just knows that there's 2300 days, and it's looking down to the end of it, which I'll show in a second. But he still doesn't even understand the mare. So he basically doesn't understand anything. Okay, here's the point of reference. The mare is of the evening and mornings. Let's look at this real quick. This is from some of those last ones we looked at on the last page, the last chapters there, or verses. Notice, what are these evenings and mornings? Because the mare of the evenings and mornings. What evenings and mornings? It's another thing you wouldn't see, unfortunately, in the King James Version. Let's continue, though. It's a reference, right? Here's the reference. When he was asking about the chazon at the very beginning, right before the mare appear, this first scene, this word appearance, which is the first occurrence of mare in this chapter and this vision, and I briefly mentioned it. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days. That in the text is actually the first occurrence of this evenings and mornings. So the mare of these evenings and mornings is told as true. We go back to here, but the mare hasn't even been mentioned yet. Remember, it was all Hazon up to this point. And Daniel was like, I wanted to know what this Hazon was about. And then there's this interjection of the mare. So somehow the mare we just saw before this page is about these evenings and mornings. But this seems to suggest that evenings and mornings have to do with the only thing mentioned so far, which is this Hazon vision. So the evenings, like I just said, the evenings and mornings are the 2300. Evenings and mornings, the 2300. And it says it's for the time of the end and many days in the future. Right here. Right. This is before what we just looked at. But he's told, I'll make you understand. I think it was before that. But now he interjects and he says, look, I just said I want you to understand the mare, which is introduced. I know you were seeking to understand the Hazon. And then he says, look, Gabriel, make him understand the mare. And then says, look, the Hazon, which was the evenings and mornings, is for the time of the end. See? And then again, it says it here. So what's this going on? The mare is of the evenings and mornings. So something about the explanation of this mare, or this interjection of the mare, is associated with the 2300, even though the 2300 when it's introduced, has only been associated with the Hazon. So how does this make sense? The only plausible way, because we've seen that there's a distinction between the two words clearly. They have different focuses or foci. I don't know. So the mare of the evenings and mornings has to be in some way associated with this 2300. Well, I would suggest, which I'll back up with more data here as we go into the next chapter, but this is the first suggestion that the mare is at least overlapped or a portion of the greater Hazon vision, which is from the Persian period, and maybe before that it could be associated with the entire vision timeline of Daniel. But this, so how does that make sense? If the 2300 is also the Hazon, but he keeps saying it'll be for the time of the end. It'll be for many days in the future. And the mare is part of that, but the Hazon is associated with a large portion of the body of the prophecy. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated in a sense, but I think it's necessitated. Let's look. Remember, the first few mentions is right from the beginning. The Hazon starts in the Persian period, and then it leads into the succession of kingdoms, right? Notice this. We've only seen the Hazon at this point, and it talks about starts in Persia, describes the Persian kingdoms, Medo-Persia, and then Greek Empire, which defeats Persia. Alexander the Great, it's a historical fact, right? And then he talks about this figure is going to, at that time, of these kingdoms, which matches Daniel 7, has this evenings and mornings. There's 2,300 days. No, but this is the key part too. Let's see, I'm gonna skip that. I already talked about that. I thought that was gonna be somewhere else here. Okay. The greater vision is the Hazon, starting in the beginning of the chapter. He asks, this is what I wanted. How long? So how long? The 2,300 days is the time for the trampling of the sanctuary, or however you want to say it. I'm trying to be unbiased here and just state facts here. But notice the question is, how long shall the Hazon concerning the daily being taken away and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? He asked that question, how long? So what does that mean? You want to know the whole expanse of the time period that this happens. How long? And the answer is unto 2,300 evening mornings. And that's at the time it's cleansed. In other words, the end of that period, because that's how long would be up into the end of it. That is trampled. So in other words, that's looking down to the end of it. Well, what did it say? This is for the time of the end, for many days in the future. And there's many other things I could tie to this, but I'm just going to stop there for now to say, in the next one, I'll point out how this connects to Daniel 9 clearly. But those are just some of the separations that you won't see in the English. And I'll talk more about how to I don't like, the idea that we can't get the truth from the English version of the Bible is, I don't appreciate that idea. But we'll talk about why that actually can make sense in this case. In other words, you can even say it was concealed in a certain way. Not that you couldn't find out this information, but if you have any respect for the facts of translation and original manuscripts and the validity of Scripture and the preservation of Scripture, and you want to deny and have to say, well, the English is better than the original manuscripts, or it somehow could correct it, even though it's obscuring distinctions that the original writer and the original audience would have had in their original language it was written in. The fact is, the Mare and the Hazon are both two different words, and they have distinctions, and not just the usage of the two different words is making that distinction, but the questions that are asked in the text. He asks about the Hazon. The guy says to make him understand the Mare, and then he tells him, hey, the thing you were wondering about, that thing, which is pointing to the end of the 2,300, is for the time of the end. It's for many days in the future, and I'll make other correlations following up, describing how chapter 8 and 9 connect, and how this figure, chapter 8, is associated with later chapters and at the end of Daniel, which are directly tied to the time of trouble and the end of the world, the resurrection of the dead, and the setting up of God's kingdom, everlasting kingdom, which has already been laid out in Daniel 7. Again, this is making the distinctions, the necessary distinctions from the text and from the language, that there are two different visions, types of visions being employed, and it's lost in the English. And you have to, if you're honest with the text and the indicators in the conversation of the narrative, it's undeniable. So we're gonna see in the next thing we look at is a preview of the next week that the Mare is the 70 weeks of Daniel, which is the time period of when Messiah would come. And that when we see that that's the case, we see that the beginning of the 2,300 evenings and mornings is the same beginning of the 70 weeks prophecy, which is the Mare. So when we get the starting point in Daniel 9 for the Mare, and we see that the Mare is the first portion of the Hazon vision, it sets the starting point for the 2,300 and the 70 weeks, which are a portion of the Hazon, the first portion. Because why give a 2,300 literal day prophecy and then not get a starting point, which is what most interpretations do, even though the indicators in the text of Daniel 8 and 9 show you that Daniel doesn't understand it. He's praying about it, and then he gets his answer. And his answer is the prophecy of when Jesus would show. So it gives him a starting point from the decree, which starts in Persia, by the way, which is where Daniel 8 starts the vision instead of Babylon, which is what chapter 2 and chapter 7 do. It's in the timeline that starts in chapter 8 in the Persian period, which is when the decree that gives us the starting point for Jesus' first coming. And so if you don't think the 2300 are a legitimate thing that reaches to 1844, it's as tight and necessary and true as the first coming of Jesus, which, by the way, those 70 weeks of years are not literal days, are they? They are day for a year. And so the 70 weeks, which are years, if you believe in Jesus anyway, they are years. And when we see that the mare is a portion of and associated with, as we've already seen in chapter 8, these two different words for vision, how could the 2300 days begin and end before the 70th week, the 70 weeks prophecy can start? It can't, which means the only possible, there's no interpretation that makes Antiochus possible, because the time of the end can't be before Jesus is born, even if you're a preterist. All right, see you next time. Thanks for coming.